In this video, we'll run down some of the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy and review some tools for changing negative self-talk. Sometimes our stress or anxiety is experienced more viscerally or in the body. This is where downregulation techniques like paced breathing come in. But other times we experience it in the form of our thoughts, usually negative self-talk. Yep, you probably know this guy. Always talking smack. Loves pointing out all the ways you are not good enough and don't measure up. Knows how things are going to turn out, and it's usually not good. Somehow knows what other people are thinking about you, and it's usually not good. He's quick to point out what you should have done but didn't. Most of the time, he gets exasperated that you cannot see things are always black and white. If you mess up, you're a loser or a failure. Meet your inner critic. All that negative self-talk is distracting you from the task at hand and mostly ruining your day with no added value. Well, this is where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in, or CBT for short. CBT is a well-researched therapy approach that looks at the connection between our thoughts and negative mood states. In a casual conversation, everybody understands when you say such and such happens and it made me feel. I forgot an important deadline at work. It made me angry, frustrated, sad. But technically, this is not quite correct. Our feelings don't respond automatically to events. There's an in-between step between event and the resulting feeling, and that is perception. So events happen. After they happen, we have a thought about the event. We give meaning to the event. And this is what determines how we feel. Well, the academics that like to study this sort of thing said, yeah, it seems to be a robust model. Thoughts come first and then feelings. But what about negative feeling states? Any patterns in the perceptions that go with them? Yep, seems to be. And we called those perceptions cognitive distortions. So just to review the model, something happens. After it happens, we have a thought about it. As a result of the thought, we have emotions. And then those emotions can affect our behavior and cause other events to happen. Well, a cognitive distortion is when an event goes through a filter of sorts. Think of like a pair of funny glasses that distorts how things appear. So the event goes in one end, comes out the other distorted. Well, there's a number of different cognitive distortions that have been identified over the years. I really encourage you to learn the names and the definitions of all the different cognitive distortions that are very common, because when you have a name for something, it makes it easier to notice that something. Learning the names of each of the distortions is not to prepare for some sort of a test, although life is a test of sorts, but I digress. Rather, it's sometimes we only have a vague sense that we aren't thinking in a helpful way. We don't have a clear direction of how to correct things. So it's helpful to have a more precise view of your thoughts that you are investigating. What exactly are you thinking right now? And does your negative emotion give any clue as to what specific cognitive distortion you might be having right now? When you have a name for something, it's easier to perceive it. Well, let's first explore one real common one, all or nothing or black and white thinking. For if your performance falls short of perfect, you see yourself as a total failure. Someone either loves you or they don't. They either trust you entirely or do not at all. I either succeeded or I failed. The distorted part of this way of thinking is when we take things that are dimensional or a matter of degree, and then we force them into two categories. You must be perfect or you're a failure. There's no middle ground. You place other people or situations into either or categories as well, with no shades of gray or allowing for the complexity of most people and situations. To reframe this cognitive distortion, avoid categorical words and use words that are more a matter of degree. For example, instead of trust or not, indicate the degree of trust and in what areas. Use words and phrases that reflect the gray areas. All or nothing thinking is a distortion because most of the things we deal with are not categorical or binary. Most things are dimensional or a matter of degree. Things become distorted when we take a dimensional thing and try to force our perceptions to be categorical. Avoiding the distortions accompanying extreme frames is part of, in Buddhist philosophy, of practicing the middle way. With practice, it gets easier to identify all or nothing language and phrase things as a matter of degree. The next one, it's called mind reading. With mind reading, you arbitrarily conclude that someone is reacting negatively to you, and you do not bother to check this out. We imagine what someone is thinking, feeling, or intending, and treat what we imagine as if it is a fact. We put thoughts into the other person's mind and then reacts to them as though it's a fact. The distortion here is that we are unable actually to read minds. We guess and are often wrong when we do. To reframe this cognitive distortion, try to get comfortable with the phrase, I don't know. Instead of speculating what someone else is thinking, feeling, or intending, replace this with, I don't know. Mind reading is distorted because we can't read minds, so believing that we can is slightly out of sync with reality. Why is he acting that way? Answer, don't know. Don't know is most in alignment with reality. If I start with don't know, I can always ask the other person about their mind, and then I know. Occasionally practice making up stories. Why was that person rude? They might be a bad person who's rude to everyone. Maybe they have a headache or otherwise don't feel well. Perhaps grandma is in the hospital and they're preoccupied. Maybe they are mind reading and putting thoughts into my head. Maybe they had their dog die this morning. When you start making up stories, it helps to remind yourself that people exist in a larger context. The more you make up stories, the more you recognize that that is precisely what mind reading is. And one story is as good as another. Another similar cognitive distortion is called the fortune-telling error. Just like we can't read minds, we also can't know the future because it hasn't unfolded yet. In this cognitive distortion, you imagine how the road is going to unfold. You anticipate that things will turn out badly, and then you feel convinced that your prediction is already true. The distortion here is that we don't know the future with any certainty. One of the problems of fortune telling is that it can lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy. For example, you convince yourself that a colleague at work is mad at you for some prior event. Because of this belief, you might be somewhat stilted or terse in your interactions with the colleague. The colleague eventually becomes annoyed and says so. Then you congratulate yourself on how perceptive you are, completely unaware of how your actions brought on the thing you were predicting. So the reframe for the fortune telling error is similar to mind reading. Just as you cannot read minds, you cannot predict the future. You know your past, but you don't know how the road's going to unfold. Because the future is unknown, you're most in alignment with reality when you get comfortable with don't know. How's that meeting going to go? Don't know. What's going to happen when you confront your friend? Don't know. Often people will say, you don't understand. When I don't know, that's when I'm the most anxious. Well, what is essential to realize is it is not the fact that something is unknown that makes you anxious. You're anxious because you have a tendency as a human being to want to fill in the blank with a story. Most of the time you choose a story that makes yourself anxious. A blank slate is not as scary as an elaborate story. Emotional reasoning. You assume that your negative emotions necessarily reflect how things are. You believe that what we feel must be true automatically. The unhelpful thinking style of emotional reasoning is where emotions are taken as evidence of truth. This is backwards because your feelings reflect or a product of your thoughts and beliefs that may be invalid. After all, if thoughts are biased, then emotions experienced as a result don't correspond to the world as it is. An example of emotional reasoning includes feeling hopeless and concluding that the problem is impossible to solve, or feeling angry and concluding that the other person is acting badly. You assume that your unhealthy emotions reflect how things are. I feel it, therefore it must be true. The reframe is to ask yourself, what evidence do you have that's inconsistent with the feeling? What other factors might account for the feeling? Could internal factors account for the feeling? For example, am I anxious? Maybe it's because I had too much coffee. Should statements. Should statements is where we have a list of ironclad rules about how others and we should behave. People who break the rules make us angry, and we feel guilty when we violate these rules. You try to motivate yourself with should as if you had to be whipped and punished before you could be expected to do anything. Musts and oughts are also offenders. The emotional consequence is guilt. You feel anger, frustration, and resentment when you direct should statements towards others. I should not have spent so much money. I must always succeed expectations. They shouldn't be doing that. So the reframe is try saying what you want to say, but without using the word should or any of its synonyms. The should doesn't add anything to the problem. Instead, address the problem without adding the should layer on top of the situation. For example, you might say, I should have studied harder. Well, perhaps you should have. You didn't, but what do you want to do now, if anything? Or you might say, they shouldn't be acting that way. Well, maybe they shouldn't, but they are. Is there anything to be done? There is no value added by the should statement. It only makes you either annoyed or regretful. It doesn't change the problem space. It's better to just have the problem without the extra layer of annoyance or guilt. Labeling and mislabeling. This is an extreme form of overgeneralization. We generalize one or two qualities into a negative global judgment. Instead of describing an error in context of a specific situation, a person will attach an unhealthy label to themselves. For example, they might say, I'm a loser when they fail at a specific task. When someone else's behavior rubs a person the wrong way, they may attach an unhealthy label to him, such as, he's a real jerk. Mislabeling involves describing an event with language that's highly colored and emotionally loaded. For example, instead of saying, someone drops her children off at daycare every day, someone mislabeling might say, she abandons her children to strangers. The reframe is ask yourself what the exact definition of the label is you are using. We often use a word with a negative connotation without thinking about the actual definition. In any case, labeling is a distortion because it takes a person or situation which is fluid and changing and turns it into something permanent or static. Things are always changing. They're not static and permanent. And so this is very applicable when trying to overcome labeling. What does it mean to define ourselves as inferior, a loser, a fool, or abnormal? Examining these and other global labels will likely reveal that they are more closely represent specific behaviors or an identifiable behavior pattern instead of the total person. There's a few more we can hit on here. Personalization. That's when you see yourself as the root cause of some adverse event that you were not primarily responsible for. You imagine you are the sole reason other people do what they do, and thinking that everything people do or say is a reaction to you. You also compare yourself to others, trying to determine who's more intelligent, better looking, etc. A person sees themselves as the cause of some unhealthy external event they were not responsible for. For example, we were late at the dinner party and caused the hostess to overcook the meal. This wouldn't have happened if I had only pushed my husband to leave on time. The reframe. What other factors might cause others to do what they do besides you being the root cause? We often forget that other people have a complex life with many moving parts, just as we do. They have unique journeys with uncountable influences that might affect how they respond to any situation. Yet, we typically learn this personalization distortion when we're raised in an environment where others often project blame onto others. For example, caregivers may have said, "You make me mad." If you hear a lot of projected blame, you can develop a reflex where you feel as though you're the cause for other people's feelings. Control fallacies. If we feel externally controlled, we see ourselves as helpless and a victim of fate. For example, I can't help it if the quality of the work is poor. My boss demanded I work overtime on it. The fallacy of internal control has us assuming responsibility for the pain and happiness of everyone around us. For example, why aren't you happy? Is it because of something I did? When we feel angry, it's often due to misdirected control. It's when I'm trying to control something that in reality I have no control over. So, the reframe is to remember you only have control from your fingertips back. If you try to control other people or situations to regulate how you feel, this will often lead to anger and frustration. Reframing control as being directed only towards yourself does not mean you necessarily have to adopt a passive stance. You might respond passively, assessing that there's nothing to be done in this situation, or you might respond very actively, but only controlling your own actions. It's usually very calming to clarify control in our minds. You can adopt this mantra: there's nothing out there I have control over. I only have control over how I respond to out there. The fallacy of fairness. We feel resentful because we know what is fair, but others won't agree. As our parents may have told us, life isn't always fair. People who go through life applying a measuring ruler against every situation, judging as fairness, will often feel bad and negative because of the constant measuring. The reframe is try to view the situation without measuring your opinion about the fairness. What, if anything, is to be done, despite whether the situation is fair? A problem may not be fair, but you may still have to deal with it in some fashion. Sometimes there might be a mechanism for addressing a lack of fairness. Other times things just happen. It is essential to understand that the universe is not keeping score, passing out misfortune in equal doses to everyone. Sometimes you can do everything right and still have a bad outcome. Blaming. Blaming is when you blame other people for your pain or take the other track and blame yourself for every problem. For example, stop making me feel bad about myself. Well, nobody can make you feel any particular way. Only you have control over your emotions and emotional reactions because you control the meaning you choose to give what you are experiencing. To practice reframing blaming, try to avoid making other people the cause of how you feel. If you say things like, "You make me mad," you are putting the root cause of your feelings in the other person. You can't control other people, but you can control how you react to other people. If you remind yourself that how you look at the situation is what makes you feel, you are more in control of your reaction. Always being right. With this cognitive distortion, you are continually on trial to prove your correct opinions and actions. Being wrong is unthinkable. You will go to any length to demonstrate your rightness. For example, I don't care how badly arguing with me makes you feel. I will win this argument no matter what because I'm right. Being right often is more important than the feelings of the other person who engages in this cognitive distortion, even loved ones. Sometimes we fall into this distortion when we don't understand the difference between things that are subjective and things that are objective. So things that are subjective are opinions and preferences. Things that are objective are facts. So to practice reframing, ask yourself, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Sometimes we pursue being right even at the expense of our happiness and those around us. Ask yourself what it means to you if you are right, but others can't accept that. Ask yourself whether or not you are applying right and wrong to something subjective or a matter of opinion. Is loving kindness driving the conversation or your ego? Heaven's reward fallacy. Aaron Beck described heaven's reward fallacy as expecting all sacrifice and self-denial to pay off, as if someone were keeping score, and feeling disappointed and even bitter when the reward does not come. The irrational belief that the universe will somehow reward all of your sacrifices may seem like a comforting thought. It can promise hope for positive consequences. But not all effort or hard work gets rewarded. Not all sacrifices will entitle you to a reward. And not all sacrifices will get redeemed by the universe. Heaven's reward might be a comforting thought, but it can lead to disappointment and judgments like life is too unfair. In most cases, it is a reasonable belief that results depend on hard work and sacrifice. But an exaggerated version of that, your hard work will make you succeed no matter what, is the heaven reward fallacy. For example, sometimes you can do everything correctly and still have a bad outcome. So the reframe is ask yourself why you feel bitter if your sacrifice and self-denial are not, quote, paying off? Are you angry at some cosmic scorekeeper? Are you doing things as an end of themselves or to get some payoff? Behaving in a kind way just seems to be a good way to be. However, if you act in a kind way and you want to be appreciated or admired for it, the motivation behind the kindness is the problem, not the kindness itself. Sometimes people ask me, why do I have these cognitive distortions? That's an excellent question. Of course, the answer can be different for different people, but what I've found is a common source of cognitive distortions is what we hear frequently while growing up. If you experienced a parent that was often critical, overgeneralized, labeled you with mean names and so forth, you will likely develop thought patterns that mirror this speech. The speech does not always have to be directed directly at us. Suppose we grow up sitting around the dinner table and often hear conversation reflecting all or nothing thinking, mind reading, labeling, etc. In that sense, we will likely begin to internalize that thinking. Growing up, we also develop fundamental beliefs about relationships and how they work by observing relationships around us. So, cognitive distortions are also an outgrowth of not understanding reality clearly. Even the basic idea that our perceptions can be faulty and deceive us, if not understood, can lead to distorted thoughts. One common problem is being overly confident and unquestioning of one's perceptions in general. When I make a mistake, I think everything I view is objective. How I see things is how it is. Suppose this is my starting point about how reality works. In that case, my thought process will inevitably be highly rigid, out of alignment with reality, and as a result, a powerful engine for suffering. Well, what's a way to practice getting more aware of cognitive distortions and learning how to push back on them? Well, one common tool is called the 3-column technique. To begin using this technique, it's a writing exercise. And we want to unpack a situation that we're kind of grinding on by thinking of our simple CBT model: event, perception, feeling. So we start by describing the upsetting event. In the journal writing, you describe an event that you're feeling reactive toward. Use objective terms without a layer of interpretation. For example, you would write, "My coworker said, quote, your presentation could have been better," end quote. As opposed to saying, "My coworker said my presentation was lame and it made me mad." Take the time to notice the layers of interpretation and get used to simply stating what happened without adding that layer of interpretation. Then record the feelings you're having. Try to write down the words as specifically as you can. For example, if you feel angry, is it a hurt kind of anger, perhaps resentment, or is it a frustrated kind of anger, perhaps irritability or exasperation? This verbal labeling process is actually important because it begins the process of down-regulating the emotion. So then we're going to bang out 3 columns, hence the name of the exercise. In the first column, we're going to write down your thoughts in a stream of consciousness fashion. In other words, don't edit yourself or approach the task as if someone's reading over your shoulder. Just let the thoughts flow. If you're a very bright and verbal person, you may be used to thinking at 110 miles per hour, but you can only write at 10 miles per hour. While this can be frustrating, it is also a benefit. By slowing down with the writing, you will find your thoughts will also slow down. You can then be more able to notice threads that connect your thoughts and see how these connections relate to how you feel. It's often good when you're upset about something to first slow down. So you write and you write and you write until you feel like you've said all that you have to say about the event. Well, in the second column now, we're going to take a pause and then go back and read what you wrote. When you do this, a real powerful shift happens. You are now in observer mode. Observing your thoughts is a very different thing from experiencing your thoughts. And this powerful psychological shift that occurs cannot be overstated. In observer mode, you can more critically examine your thoughts and your thought patterns. Are there any examples of cognitive distortions in this narrative that I've generated? If so, identify the specific cognitive distortion by name in the second column. Remember, knowing the names of things that can play out in your head makes it more likely for you to be able to notice them. Once you can identify specific cognitive distortions by name, that enables you to more effectively push back and reframe. Well, that's what we do in the third column. In the third column, we work on reframing the thoughts about the event. Say whatever you want to say, but try to say it without the cognitive distortion. It's important to remember that this last step is not positive thinking to replace negative thinking. It's not an attempt to adopt a Pollyannish outlook where everything is puppies and rainbows. It's not striving in the direction of toxic positivity. Sometimes events are unfortunate, but is it a catastrophe? So this step seeks to replace the distorted thinking with a thought that is more in alignment with reality without the distorted filters. It's common when beginning this process to emphasize changing the content of the thought from negative to positive in an attempt to have, quote, better thoughts. But don't merely change the content, change the filter. So, for example, don't replace negative fortune telling with positive fortune telling. Instead, avoid fortune telling altogether. Simply say, don't know. In the third column, we can use the reframes that we've discussed earlier for each cognitive distortion that we recognize. So, push back on the cognitive distortions and notice how that inner critic begins to fade into a powerless whisper. If you want a PDF on what we covered today, drop me an email. Feel free to email or message me on social media if you have any questions. And check out my recent book, The Mindful Warrior, available on Amazon. And check out the Mindful Path, which describes some of the overlap and similarities between modern psychotherapy and Buddhist practices. So, feel the power that comes when you are no longer weighted down by negative narratives playing in your head, and have a great rest of the day.